Here's the thing. If you ask the average Bridgerton viewer who their favorite Bridgerton sibling was back when season one dropped 6 years ago, a significant number of them would say Benedict Bridgerton. If you then followed the question by asking who then took up that title of favorite Bridgerton sibling when season two was released, a still significant number of them will still name Benedict as having that honor, although with it being Anthony's season and the redemption that was given to Anthony's character, that answer might see some of them mentioning Anthony instead. However, if you then repeated that question for season three, you will notice a marked change. Only a few fans will still pull up Benedict Bridgerton. And whilst there can be different reasons given for this, in my opinion, I do think that the reason why Benedict stopped being a favorite was because narratively, he became stuck in performing the role of the persistent rake who keeps having sex with anyone that would have him over and over and over again, and his role as the beleaguered artist, exhausted and lacking any inspiration due to the self doubts and criticisms that had crept into his art. Which, of course, then meant that it is that Benedict Bridgerton, with all of his baggage, that we follow into season four. A Benedict who is stuck. And what I find interesting, most interesting really about the season, is that as if by some serendipitous choice of fate or by the wherewithal of the writing team, a core theme and exploration for the season is the acknowledgement of various characters who, like Benedict, find themselves stuck. And what then follows through the season is us watching them trying to unstick. Is that a word? Unstick themselves. We see this with Araminta, with Sophie, with Penelope, with Lady Danbury, with Queen Charlotte, with Varley, and even hell, with Eloise as well. There's just something about having the writing carry through in such a conscious way, whereby we follow a main character and see their struggles reflected in the supporting cast and plot that just makes me particularly giddy. And I like to talk about that. Now, before we dive deeper into the various reasons why basically everyone was stuck in Bridgerton season four, I will first like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Kat, Lena, Sherry, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that said, let's start off with the character that best encapsulates this particular theme, Benedict Bridgerton, who, like I stated at the start of the video, has been stuck due to a lack of purpose that saw him losing faith in his own art and abilities due to his belief of his own inferiority brought on by Anthony's meddling. Yes, it was done out of love, but also for a family that is as prideful as the Bridgertons and for a brother who has always considered himself the spare. One would have thought that Anthony would have realized just how badly that would have gone down, although, in Anthony's defense, he isn't really the most emotionally mature of his siblings. That designation goes to Benedict Bridgerton and Colin. Yeah, and Colin too, when you actually think about it. It's interesting to note when we really think about that whilst our default is to believe that Benedict as a character is stuck because he can't find or see a way forward with his life as an artist due to the doubts and fears that overwhelm him, I also think that it applies as well to what it means for him as a brother who, whilst everyone in the family had waited for Anthony to finally settle down and have a heir, still had to have it at the back of his mind that there was the potential of him needing to step into his brother's role should anything happen to Anthony. That is the life of a spare, after all. The pause, the waiting to see if the worst would happen, and you will find yourself shouldering the responsibility that you never really signed up for. And before anybody wants to talk about the improbability of that, consider the childhood of the two eldest Bridgerton boys and the sudden improbability of them losing their father out of the blues, with to them no actual justifiable cause other than a bee sting that completely upended their life. Until Anthony's line was secure, Benedict would have always had to put himself on hold, just in case. which to me makes it even more fitting that the season when Benedict got his happy ending and gets the chance for his life to really progress in the sense of him rediscovering his art and also finding love and family and being able to move forward. I find it interesting that all of that happened in the very same season when Anthony's heir was born, thus effectively making Benedict's role as the spare in waiting a moot point. Season 4 was when Benedict truly got unstuck in his art, in his position within the family, and even as far as the writing is concerned as well, because there's only so many seasons that the show could continue to push the rake narrative for Benedict before it got truly laborious. And it was already hitting that point by season 3. And honestly, I kind of see the same applying to Eloise Bridgerton as well. Not her being a rake, of course, but the fact that narratively, Eloise, just like Benedict, has been written into a corner personality wise, which I think has been reflected in the way in which the Bridgerton fandom have related to her. As a result of that, with Benedict, it was the fact that a lot of them were honestly getting quite sick and tired of him being reduced to the rake persona. And with Eloise, it's her contrarian ways that seem to exist just to position her as this young lady who looks down on the other women of the ton and their interests, especially if said interests do not align with hers. She's always been the sort of one note in that particular depiction of her. And so having this season be focused not just on her mocking everyone around her, which to be fair, she still kind of did in season 4A, but to also have her really come to terms with what life as a spinster will look like for her gives a major bit of depth to her characterization. Yes, it's a sign of her growing and changing as a character to learn that whilst there is the freedom of not being bound in matrimony, should she choose the life of being a spinster, she also unfortunately has to come to terms with the fact that it means that a lot of that freedom then gets tied to the service she has to execute as the older chaperone figure, since that is the purpose she now gets to serve within the home. It makes her a more sympathetic character to me, at least, because Eloise is simply a young woman born outside of the time that would have served her best. If she had lived in the 21st century, for example, her choosing to remain unmarried would still have left her with a pretty satisfying, fulfilling life lived on her own terms. But she's bound within the Regency era, and it's not one that is very kind to spinsters. Now, do I still wish and root for her freedom? Yes. It's a pity, really, that since Bridgerton is a romance series and show, we will eventually see Eloise married, but hopefully we get to see her make that choice and she finally gets to step out of the corner that she's been painted into, a corner that has frustrated the audience for years and also affected just how she's been perceived through not really that much fault of hers, but on her own terms. And then there's Sophie Bake, whose narrative journey looks quite different from Benedict's, in that whilst Benedict is trying to find meaning for himself and his life, which has entrapped him in an endless cycle for quite a while, narratively speaking, Sophie's, on the other hand, is tied more to her own fears about repeating her mother's mistake and getting stuck in the same life and the same experience that her mother had. It's interesting to me that Sophie, who started off as the illegitimate child of the Earl of Penwood and the training that that position afforded her, with the death of her father, was relegated to the exact same situation a mother had been in, a life of a maid. And as if that wasn't bad enough, it looked like she was stuck in the unending cycle of needing to repeat her mother's entire existence, what with not just her being a maid, but also her falling into a sexual and romantic relationship with the gentleman she served. It's why she was so insistent on not becoming Benedict's mistress and why she was so terrified at the possibility of getting pregnant after their first sexual encounter, because that would have been beyond any reasonable doubt forced her into a life where she's perpetually bound to Benedict's service in a role that she has so desperately tried to escape and avoid replicating. Hell, even her experience in the household with Araminta is one that would have seen her spend the rest of her life, or at least her youth, bound to Araminta's whims and caprices as she served the household. It took her sleeping free for one night attending the Bridgerton masquerade ball and catching the attention of Benedict Bridgerton, an attention that Araminta resented her for taking away from Rosamond. It took that act for her to effectively become unstuck as far as what would have been her future with Araminta and her daughters, amazing though Posey is. Araminta, on the other hand, is driven by the fact that she has been effectively trapped in her marriage. And I know there might be fans who disagree with me, but do consider where I'm coming from. Araminta, after the loss of her first husband, Lord Lee, was desperate to find a new one who would be able to take her in and take care of her girls. And she gets to meet the Earl of Penwood. She loves him as much as she allows herself, of course, until she arrives at her new home and learns that he's kept a secret from her, an illegitimate child that she's now stuck with and has to raise alongside her daughters. And then he dies, and she has to continue with that as per the dictates of the Earl's will that ties her sustenance and the support he affords her daughter, the reason why she married him, to her raising and caring for Sophie. Now, we know she does not do that because to raise a child is very different from enslaving said child, but it still doesn't take away the fact that in that situation, she was trapped. And there is a popular Chinese saying about a forced fruit never being sweet, which we see clearly highlighted in Araminta's treatment of Sophie. And I'm sorry, I will forever be team. The signs were there. Lord Gunn should have made proper provisions, i.e., gotten others, preferably his lawyers, to ensure that Araminta followed the requirements of his will, the spirit of it, to the latter properly, or he should have arranged another caregiver. I'm just saying. But back to the events of the season, it took the Bridgertons and Posey exposing Araminta's hypocrisy and lies for her and Sophie to finally part ways in a more permanent of fashions. Prior to the event of Sophie coming into contact with the Bridgertons and by extension the plot, she and Araminta were stuck with each other for better or worse, actually, more for worse. But now Sophie is free, and whilst it might not look so at first, so is Araminta after all is said and done. It doesn't make up or excuse her years of abuse, nor does it change how unjust she's been to Sophie, but it does fit in with the themes of the season as well. And the same can be said to apply, of course, to Lady Danbury and Queen Charlotte both. Theirs is a relationship, a friendship that has spanned decades since a young Queen Charlotte married King George and Agatha Danbury stepped in first as her lady in waiting and then as one of her best friends. And we've seen their relationship thrive and honestly be one of the best things that we've gotten to see in the seasons of the show so far. But just like I mentioned in a video I made months before season 4 dropped, Agatha Danbury as a character was quickly typecasted into the role of mother TM, where she quickly had barely any sort of storyline or character arc for herself that was not tied to the Bridgertons and her mothering the Bridgerton kids. And her mothering the Bridgerton kids. Yes, I know she did eventually gain a friendship with Violet, and there was the bit of her struggling to come to terms with Violet's relationship with her brother Marcus. But it still left a big gap for me, at least, whereby we don't really get to see her as our own person, separate from the other characters. Season 4 and her arc of returning back to the continent of her birth, a place she hasn't gone back to since she became old enough to be a wife and left home, is something that resonates, that is uniquely hers and hers alone. And it fits so well with the rest of the season and the story it has to tell about discovering oneself and finding the freedom to break free and simply be. With Queen Charlotte, it's more tied to her fear of change, which can we really blame her? What with the man she loves having slowly lost his mind in the years that they have been together, she's desperate to cling on to the old times. A lot of the characters who are stuck in time in the show, Queen Charlotte really encapsulates that quite well. The dresses that her ladies in waiting have to wear is one that is frozen in time, Georgian in Regency era, which is as visually accurate and representative of her emotional state as one can get. Her insistence that the lot of them stand silent, serving their roles, adds to that. It's like after Lady Danbury left her service, everything was frozen as is because Queen Charlotte stuck in the familiarity and comfort of the status quo of not being challenged or pushed by anyone outside of Lady Danbury. And even with that, Agatha, it is up to a point, a certain point that she allows it. She is the queen after all. And so the significance of Alice stepping into that role, filling the recently evacuated gap of a lady in waiting and getting to address the queen's ennui in a way that is uniquely hers, even as she shakes things up for Charlotte, is meant to show us that change is coming. Now, I doubt if it would happen, but it would make sense for me if we see the change reflected in season 5, with the changing of the mandated dress designs for Queen Charlotte's ladies in waiting, and with Alice being the first to push for it. I'm just saying. Mrs. Varley, on the other hand, has been stuck in the quasi position of housekeeper turned confidant, but without enjoying the requisite increase in pay that would accompany her added responsibilities, especially when you consider that she too started to source for gossip for Penelope, even though the latter didn't publish them as they were too damaging for the young women in question. With Vali, I see a woman stuck in a situation that highly disfavors her, and it takes Araminta showing up in the fourth season and making her moves of poaching staff from the other families in Mayfair for Vali to get her chance to break free and ultimately get to make the choice that leads to her eventual benefit. Valley reminds me of one of the offices I'd previously worked at where we were trapped, all of us, and fed some line about us being family and working together to make the business successful. Like, what you're being told is total and complete bullshit and one that is utterly unfair to you. And yet you find yourself unable to leave, bound by that guilt because you have developed close bonds with your colleagues. They have become your family. But at the same time, you find yourself resenting the system that refuses to pay you what you're worth, barely offering you a living wage when you have to put in so much work and go over and beyond in the service you provide. I see the same applying to Varley. Like clearly, forging George Crane's signature is so far out of the scope of her responsibilities as a housekeeper. And yet she does it because she's bound to the Featheringtons, particularly to Portia, to whom she's utterly loyal. Well, I know we don't get direct confirmation, but considering she's done it before, I'm fairly certain that she's also the one who forged the letter in Jack Featherington's hands declaring that the Featherington barony should go to whichever Featherington daughter was the first to birth an heir. I repeat, she's gone over and beyond consistently, and yet she's still not adequately compensated for her work, and that hurts her. We see her heartbreak when she realizes that Portia would rather try and placate her with old out of season clothes rather than pay her what she's worth, even though the family can now afford to do so now that they are out of dire straits. And you see her being torn up about it on screen, stuck between the devotion to the family she loves and has loyally served, or being able to look out for her interest and herself. And of course, she ends up choosing herself. Now, Araminta is absolutely horrid, and Valley eventually finds her way back to Portia and the rest of the Featheringtons, but she's able to do so on better terms, where she gets to be paid well and recognized for her value and importance in the household, whilst getting to serve the Featheringtons like she so desires. And you can see that it's visibly freeing for her. And finally, there's Penelope, who, after her reveal as Lady Whistledown at the end of season 3, spent most of season 4A trying to navigate her new status as the open and known face of the column, which of course meant that she had to deal with her mother looking over her shoulder at the juicy gossip that she has access to and wants Pen to share. Which, side note to those who mentioned that Varley most likely would partner with Portia to become the new Whistledown in response to my Who is the New Lady Whistledown video, I only thought of Varley, but thinking of the partnership of the two women actually makes a lot more sense. So thank you. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Pen has to deal with her mother constantly hovering, the subject of her gossip, showing up at her house to demand answers and accountability, even as they shirk theirs with regards their own roles and actions. And most importantly, the queen who's turned her into her very own jester, living for her whims and caprices, whose sole purpose now existed to keep said queen entertained and well informed. And whilst the previous season had Penelope in love with her work as Lady Whistledown, hell, she fought both Eloise and Colin in that regard to have them take her life's work as something she considered sacred and serious. By season 4, it's become a chain around her neck that she's desperate to lose and free herself from. And she gets to do that, passing on the baton to someone else. Of course, the plan was for her to kill the column entirely and let it go. But when you've built that amount of power and clout and wealth, it's very hard for others to want to let go of it. And you find yourself still caught within its web regardless. Of course, this doesn't just apply to Penn, but to the rest of the ton in Mayfair, whose scandals will also be captured on the page. For them, however, it's something that a majority of the ton welcome and enjoy, because whilst it might might feel uncomfortable living within a fishbowl, being observed by some other person who you interact with, who is documenting all of that experience without giving anything away. We get to see that a number of them do not mind the traps as long as it's glittering fun and filled with the scandals of others. But of course, these are just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you on Monday with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.